Okay, let's move on to CB-15-2024, the zoning omnibus bill. This is an ordinance concerning the zoning ordinance. This is an ordinance concerning the zoning ordinance of Prince George's County omnibus bill for the purpose of reconciling certain terms, procedures, and other language of the new zoning ordinance, being Chapter 27, 2019, laws of Prince George's County, revising certain procedures and regulations, and adding clarification language to further effectuate successful implementation of the county's new modern streamlined zoning ordinance. Sponsors is myself, committee chair. Obviously, this is a very large bill, generating a lot of interest. It's my intent today to take voluminous public comment, get a briefing from Park and Planning, and run down the list of amendments that we know of, and then hopefully look through this and come back in 2 weeks to figure out exactly what we're doing. I know Ms. Ivy wants to push her amendment today, but apart from that, there's just too much volume for just to cram this through. And I think, considering the public interest, we need to be deliberate. So with that, I'll turn to Ms. Hightower.
Thank you, Chair. You've received numerous comments that have been submitted from municipalities, citizens, organizations, and attorneys. Those letters and comments can be found on pages 317 through 380 of your virtual binder. You also have proposed amendments from council members, as you mentioned, which are on page 383 through 391 of your virtual binder. The Planning Board voted to support CB-15-2024 with amendments. There's also a memorandum in your virtual binder, and they're here to present a PowerPoint to address some of the comments that were discussed during their public hearing. Also, the zoning hearing examiner provided comments on the proposed bill, which are on pages 392 through 395 of your virtual binder. The county executives, Ms. Skinner from the county executive's office is here to discuss any comments that they may have, as well as Ms. Hernandez from the Office of Law. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition, there was a follow-up binder with a couple dozen comments, mostly from residents, which Park and Planning has not addressed at this time. As the apparent sponsor of this bill, I'm going to make a couple comments. This is a very important piece of legislation. We always knew that when the new zoning ordinance came in that we would need to make amendments. And Park and Planning has been working with the development community for a couple of years now, pulling them together. There's not agreement, but because of the volume, I sat down with Park and Planning and went through a couple hundred revisions during the recess, and then they put any additional revisions together, and then I went through a couple hundred revisions again. And I want to make sure people understand that this bill is a pro-developer bill. Through and through, this is to support the development industry. And if you look at the changes that are being proposed, there are numerous, almost 100%, 98%, this is for the development community. And I'm supporting it. And I proposed one amendment, which is to streamline the zoning process, which supports the development community, to shorten things up. One thing that I did propose in the original draft was the CGO issue, which has hit a nerve, but we'll talk about that. But I'm curious about why limiting sprawl while supporting transit-oriented development and asking for sprawl projects to demonstrate that they are good for the county, not saying no to them, but make them demonstrate what they bring, is such an impediment. But we'll talk about that. So that's my quick summary. I will say that, because this is something that I think is just out there. I was invited to speak with a number of activists over the weekend, and because this is so voluminous, they asked me to summarize what I thought were the most important points. So I put that out in my e-newsletter, which a lot of you get, a lot of council members get. So my position is, what someone from Park and Planning said to me yesterday, your position is clear. And that was intentional. And it has generated a lot of public interest. So we will take all the public comments we have from people who signed up today, but my impression is that more comments are coming in. So with that, I'm going to turn to the county administration first before the Park and Planning comments. And I know Mr. Burlage and Chad are going to go very quickly through those comments. Ms. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, good morning. So we support, we do have some commentary and that may turn into potential friendly amendments, but we are here with DCO Angie Rogers, who will go into more of the commentary that we want to offer to the committee.
Good morning, Chair, and the rest of the council. I'll keep my comments today high level, given that it looks like we are going to have more discussion about this, and just say that the administration is in support of the bill with some amendments. We are supportive of the planning board and the planning department's recommendations for amendments to this bill, with probably 3 departures that we hope are going to be sort of ripe for friendly discussion. One is on this issue of owners having access to the old use tables. I know the council took some action last year to provide some extended access to those old use tables. But there is, I think, currently a provision that says that if the space goes dark, and I think it's for 180 days, that you then have to tag to the new use table. I think we'd like to see some extension of that 180 days, giving owners some additional time to re-tenant. Re-tenanting, I think the last time around was a lengthy discussion. So I think we're looking at something along the lines of 2 to 3 years of what we were looking at before. We'd like to see something along those lines proceed. In terms of transitional provisions related to spaces that are already built out and their ability to make alterations to those spaces, I think we want to see some more discussion about provisions that would particularly protect large properties. I think right now there's a provision that sort of speaks to either alterations of 30,000 square feet or 10%, whichever is less. We think that's a little bit conservative, particularly for large multi-phase projects, and want to see some discussion of that. And then lastly, to the issue that you mentioned regarding essentially no townhomes in CGOs outside of the Capital Beltway. We are in opposition to that amendment. The townhouse discussion, sort of for townhouses outside of the Beltway, was a robust discussion the last time that we had it. I think our position on it remains the same. I see in the planning board amendment that they tried to offer some sort of maybe a middle ground here. But we would like to, I think we remain in opposition. If there is a boundary, it should probably, in our opinion, be a different boundary, not the Capital Beltway. And I think that there are boundaries and definitions, several of them in our county growth plan, that could be a different boundary that would allow us to still consider townhouse development in established communities, even outside of the Beltway. So I'll stop there.
Ms. Rogers, just to touch on that point, because I keep hearing this, it's not a prohibition on townhouses. come to the council, have a public discussion that the public can be engaged in, and then they can build townhouses. And it's not just townhouses. Frankly, it's probably more important that it's apartment buildings at 48 units to the acre by right without public involvement. That's the real issue. Just to be clear.
I understand that the
They're
distinction.
being presented as a ban,
that
and
you're
it's
making.
not a ban. The townhouse bill from last year was a 2-year moratorium, 0. Just to be clear.
I understand the distinction that you're making. I respectfully would offer that from our perspective, these are changes that will have the same effect as the changes that we were looking at last year. And so as at least proposed at this time, we're opposed to that amendment.
Fair enough. I'll make one point and let this go. Up until 2 years ago, every one of those properties was prohibited from having any residential, any. So now with the new zoning ordinance, they can have their heart's content. And this changes just a portion of those properties to ask permission. So they go from never being allowed to having to ask permission. That's the distinction. But I'll leave it alone. But I'll let Mr. Hawkins have his say.
Ms. Rogers, thank you for being with us today. I was listening to you and the committee chair, our chair emeritus, Mr. Denogas, talk about this. But even with the number of citizens who are going to speak, even with the discussion being this is about pro-development versus what the citizens want, in 2024, what this committee is dealing with today is another form. I want to ask you if you agree. I don't know. I'm asking the question. When we talk about the federal laws dealing with discrimination in housing, is this another form of redlining?
Ms. Skinner's going to try and save me from that question. Let me be diplomatic here and say
Ms.
that
Ms. Rogers,
I don't
you
want
don't
to.
need to answer that question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll turn to Park and Planning to go through hopefully a quick summary of the bill, the major issues, and the ones that I guess these are the questions that were raised by the development industry with your comments.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair Denoga, members of the committee, other members of the council. Thank you for having us here today. Good morning. My name is Chad Williams. I'm the project manager of zoning ordinance rewrite with the Countywide Planning Division of Park and Planning, the Planning Department. I've been asked to expedite our presentation today. I'll try to do that. I think many of my colleagues and my supervisors may think I don't know what expedite means, so let's see how well I do. I just want to make sure I've got the right mouse here. Just want to make sure here. There we go. I'll use this. So touching very briefly on the background, the purpose of the update that is before you today in CB-15-2024 is to build on the significant improvements of the new ordinance, which was the first comprehensive rewrite in more than 50 years and represented a huge effort by the public, many of whom are here today. I've run into many old friends who we spent a lot of time with in meetings over the past 8 or 9 years, the council, planning board, and staff. And this bill incorporates the lessons learned through the development community, our residents, our agency partners over the past 2 years. As you know, the zoning ordinance is the primary vehicle to implement both the county's shared vision for the future, Plan Prince George's 2035, and to support the climate action plan and our current master plans throughout the county. The general plan was a prioritization plan primarily, focusing on growth directed to identified growth locations such as the centers and the innovation corridor. This bill and the zoning ordinance build on those goals. With the new ordinance, we streamlined procedures and approval time frames, strengthened protection for established neighborhoods, enhanced public input opportunities. We heard with CR 14 some public input opportunity discussion. This ordinance is designed to support those opportunities, improve transit areas, and focusing on transit-oriented development through new transit-oriented zones, while at the same time preserving and protecting our rural and agricultural heritage of the county. Since April 1, 2022, the ordinance has been well received. There'll be a lot of comments today about things that we still need to work on. We all recognize that. That's why we're here, continuing the conversation. We will continue that conversation on many items over the next several years. So we do recognize that. We've heard from developers, land use attorneys, municipal representatives, residents. This is an easier to use and easier to understand code. And the best sign that I think for this is that we're hearing this from land use attorneys and developers who do not work in Prince George's County today, who are looking for other opportunities and places to go and develop and work. They're looking at our ordinance, the new ordinance. They're seeing it's better than the old ordinance, which frankly may have disincentivized some of these investors in the past, and they're much more willing to consider the county under the new ordinance. 40% of our applications are using a new ordinance. That's expected to climb rapidly as people get used to it. And to date, almost 250 applications, I would say probably more than 250 applications, since it's about a month old of a slide, have been assigned under the new ordinance and the subdivision regulations. Turning to the key bill recommendations, we've oriented this discussion to focus on the main topic areas that the planning board heard during their public hearing last month. I'm going to start with transition and grandfathering and turn to my colleague, Principal Counsel David Warner, to briefly talk about what we've heard and what's recommended.
Thank you, Chad. I will be very brief. David Warner, Principal Counsel. The reason they're bringing me up here is because they asked my office to draft these provisions, because essentially over the past 2 years, legal's been getting most of the questions about how they work. And if you take the next slide, just real quickly, 2018, the adoption of the new zoning ordinance did two things with transition. If you had an existing project, there were provisions that let you to finish the project, and then there was a 2-year window in which if you hadn't started a project, you could start one and bring it under the old, the provisions of the old ordinance. There's only ever been one zoning ordinance, and that was adopted in 2018 and went into effect in 2022. We talk about there being two ordinances all the time, but really the ordinance we have in place right now says you can use provisions in the old ordinance to get the approvals you need under the law that's currently in place. The problem is that the concept is very simple. It's just very difficult to paper the language. And after I was given this project, I met with Councilmember Dernoga, engaged with people of Zoning Council, definitely with the development community, definitely with Chad and the rest of the team, to try and come up with what's the best way to explain when a project can stop using the provisions in the old ordinance and have to use the new. And that's really what we're trying to figure out. And if you do finish a project, how are those buildings and uses going to be treated? The 2-year window to bring a project under the provisions of the old ordinance is a separate issue from the issue of when are you required to stop using the provisions of the old ordinance. So those are the two issues we're trying to deal with the transitional provisions, and I just wanted to give a quick summary of that. And then the next slide explains our goals.
All right. Thank you, David. And the rest of the presentation's kind of geared, I will recognize first before making this segue that transition provisions have generated by far the most comments that we have heard from particularly the development land use communities. The rest of the presentation is oriented towards the other comments that were presented and received verbally or in writing at the planning board public hearing, starting with the easier topics, I would say, moving on to the more complex topics. And the first of those is elderly housing. We received comments. The bill recommends eliminating 2 elderly housing uses that are legacy uses. Each is only permitted in one zone by the approval of a special exception. With the removal of those 2 archaic uses, the only place in a zoning ordinance where the term elderly housing appears is in the definitions. So one of the changes since CB-73 was before you in October was to remove the term elderly housing. We had some testimony that this would mean that elderly housing would be prohibited in Prince George's County, and that is far from true. All housing is elderly housing. Those two uses I mentioned, by special exception in one zone each, would actually greatly limit elderly housing to just those situations with the way that the use table of the ordinance has always been interpreted in Prince George's County. So by removing those uses, it clears up the concept that we've always had since the initial Clarion recommendations that all housing is elderly housing. All housing types can support elderly housing. And that the definition does not impact in any way the provision of a wide variety of elderly housing uses in Prince George's County. The next topic was a comment we received on master plan conformance, a statement that there was a change, that the general plan was only being amended to the extent specified in the plan approval. That is actually not a change. On this slide, we have the language of the old ordinance on the left, the language of the new ordinance on the right. The key part here is that any area master plan or functional master plan or amendment shall be an amendment to the general plan unless stated otherwise by the district council. It's reworded a little bit for consistency with how the ordinance, the new ordinance works, but it's the same language. So we do not see that as any change, and had no comment on that at the planning board. There was a comment about open space set-asides, which, if you recall, is a requirement of the new ordinance that every development set aside a certain designated percentage of its property for open space. And this could be a variety of open spaces. There's kind of a menu of options in the code. The recommendations in the bill clarify that active recreation is a required component of open space for residential development. This is already current law, but it's kind of buried in that table of examples. The current law is a 35% requirement. Staff have agreed with the building industry advocating that 35% is a large percentage for active, especially on your smaller subdivisions. So the bill proposes a reduction to 15% of your total open space set aside for residential being active recreation. At the same time, a similar provision or requirement for our transit-oriented places was also embedded in that table, that half of the open space set aside or more in our transit-oriented activity center zones shall consist of a square, forecourt, or plaza. This bill pulls that provision out of the table and makes it clearer that this applies to all development in those zones. The comment that we received is predicated on a recommendation that the open space set aside only applies to subdivisions of 25 or more residential lots, since there's a feeling that it would be problematic to provide the open space set aside requirement in smaller subdivisions. Because the open space set asides allow developers to double count their environmental requirements from the county code, their park and recreation mandatory dedication, their landscape manual buffers. We feel that this is not an imposition, that the double count does allow these smaller subdivisions to meet the open space set aside, and we do not recommend a change at this time. I want to move a little bit faster, talk about our planned development zones, where there is a recommendation that I know you'll hear more testimony about today. But the recommendation of the bill is to add public benefits, a list of potential but not limited to public benefits, to ensure that the planned development zones and a remapping through a planned development zoning map amendment provides the community with the public benefits that are appropriate as determined by this council in the rezoning of a planned development zoning. Ensure better public infrastructure, and improve the quality of placemaking in Prince George's County. This is all a trade-off to the developer getting more density or more development yield out of these projects typically. The comment we've heard, and you'll hear again today, is to allow the agricultural residential zone to qualify for the residential planned development zone. The agricultural residential zone is a rural and agricultural class of zone. And RPD is one of the planned developments, which allows a variety of types and densities of residential development. Staff recommended it's not appropriate for any agricultural, a rural and agricultural zone to be eligible for RPD because of that potential to increase the density in our rural and agricultural places. The purposes of these zones are very different, and allowing the agricultural residential to be eligible would degrade the agricultural lands of the county and detract from the preservation and agricultural heritage goals of Plan 2035 that I briefly mentioned earlier. We heard a lot in the past 2 years about the IE zone. We have not received any comments to our knowledge on IE this year. So we think we finally got the IE zone correct. At the council's direction, we made changes to intensity and dimensional standards to more closely reflect the former I-1 zone, and we made revisions to the use table of the IE zone to more closely reflect I-1. And again, no comments have been received to our knowledge. We have one comment on how density is calculated. This is a very, very technical issue. It deals with the impact of floodplain. Right now, residential density is calculated dwellings per net lot area, which excludes the floodplain from the calculation. DPI has recently changed how it determines or interprets the floodplain calculation in the county. This has some very nuanced impacts on development proposals. You do have some letters that have come before you for specific properties and developments in Seven Springs and College Park. Staff and our Development Review Division have coordinated with the sponsor, the proponent of these comments, and are open to continued conversation around some limited density calculation changes on transit centers and growth priorities, especially where floodplain is present. I'll be honest, I do not know if those recommendations would become a potential amendment for your consideration for CB-15 or would be for the future, but we have had those conversations and we are more than open to continuing that talk. This leads us into our transit-oriented activity center zones, where there are increased maximum residential densities to support the county's growth priorities, some new locational standards to ensure these increased densities and these very important transit-oriented mixed-use Plan 2035 supportive zones are in Plan 2035 growth priority areas. And we have received a lot of some comments from the Coalition for Smarter Growth on support for these densities. They believe that these densities are more in line with transit-oriented and transit-supportive density. I do have a few images to show you what we're looking at. If you look at the bill, you're going to see some numbers. And the numbers look like they might be scary. They start at 90 dwelling units per acre. But what that means is what you see here on the left. It's a 5-story walk-up building, 5-story with podium surrounding a garage. When you're talking a little bit higher density, maybe up to 110 dwelling units per acre, you have podium garages with 4 or 5-story of stick-built residential above. Mid-rise housing starts to get at 150 dwelling units per acre. This is appropriate for our metro centers and our local transit districts. You start to see here maybe steel-built, concrete-built construction, 8 or 9 stories. And then the highest densities, which are reserved for our regional transit zones, could be over 200 dwelling units per acre. These are your tower buildings that are the best suited for right next to our metro stations in Prince George's County to yield the highest densities at the places where the county wants to see density and growth. A few real-life examples. Just down the road in that direction, Send Apollo, about 101 dwelling units per acre. You can see this is about a 5-story building. University View 1, University View 2, some of the tallest buildings in Prince George's County. They pencil out to between 112 and 194 dwelling units per acre. They're about 14, 16 stories in height. They are located on Route 1 in a targeted growth location in the Innovation Corridor with rich, robust bus transit that serves these areas, and they are very proximate to the future Purple Line. And then the former Book Exchange property is about 110 or so dwelling units per acre, 109. So given what has been recommended, what I just went over, we don't have a lot of staff discussion on making any changes to these. We think that these are good targets for Prince George's County at the locations that the council supports and the county supports through our priority plans. I believe this is our last topic, and it's a very big topic, the CGO zone outside the Capital Beltway, which, as Councilmember Dernoga mentioned, would limit multifamily, 2-family, and townhouse dwellings in the CGO zone, commercial, general, and office, to planned development rezonings when the CGO property is located outside the Capital Beltway. This does support growth priorities of Plan 2035, this recommendation, by helping to refocus and redirect density to the targeted growth locations. There was a lot of testimony received. It was universally in opposition to this recommendation. It was also in opposition to the Planning Board's proposed amendment, which try to find a middle ground for that recommendation. This is just a summary of what we've already more briefly summarized, what actually happened. No, I'm sorry. This is the planning board's recommendation, summarized in too many bullets now, confusing even me. So what the planning board has recommended is that for any CGO property or assemblage of CGO properties outside the Capital Beltway, 25 or fewer acres, that instead of requiring a plan development and zoning map amendment to allow for townhouse, two-family, and multifamily dwellings, that the council consider a special exception instead. And the council could always choose to add some special exception standards and requirements to that, should you choose to go in that direction. Anything above 25 acres would still require plan development zoning map amendment under the planning board's recommended amendment. And the rationale for that is that the planning board felt that a one-size-fits-all approach to residential uses outside of the Capital Beltway may not be as effective as envisioned, particularly since these smaller sites are often struggling commercial centers that are looking for tenants in a rapidly evolving retail and office market in the post-COVID era, and they're facing a lot of challenges. There's also policy guidance in the retail market study and various master plans that call for an evaluation of other uses for these properties. The planning board had an additional recommendation concerning non-conforming lots of record. I do know that there is one proposed amendment that the council has put in on this question as well. Current law allows one dwelling unit on a non-conforming property, residential property, regardless of its size. And this may not be appropriate in all circumstances, which the planning board agrees with. So the planning board has proposed, instead of allowing 1,000 square foot lot or a 2,500 square foot lot to develop with a house, that the minimum lot size be raised to 5,000 square feet. This is a number that's in keeping with a very common non-conforming lot size of the prior zoning ordinance, 5,000 square feet. And then clarify an interpretation that we've already implemented, that variances would be required for all other dimensional standards: your building setback for your house, the height of the house, the yard depths, etc. Anything on a lot size of less than 5,000 square feet would be, as with the prior ordinance, it would require a variance to lot size for the construction of a dwelling under this proposed amendment for your consideration. In summary, the recommendations that are in CB-15 do support and build upon the zoning ordinance. That they're trying to clarify the procedures of the ordinance that may not have been as clear as desired and lead to the outcomes originally envisioned. And there's some new things that have come up from things that we've experienced from the development of the county, not necessarily from developers per se, but even from somebody trying to build a deck or do a home improvement or a home expansion. We've been listening to all of our stakeholders and making recommendations accordingly. The proposed legislative amendment, as required by the legislative amendment process for zoning ordinance, is a finding for consistency. This amendment is consistent with Plan 2035 and the Climate Action Plan. The Planning Board recommended that adopted the findings of the technical staff report and recommended the two amendments that I discussed, and also encouraged the council to move expeditiously on legislation authorizing accessory dwelling units and the missing middle housing types in Prince George's County. With that concludes staff's presentation on the bill. Thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any questions of Mr. Williams? Ms. Bliguet?
I do want to make a comment and question. I definitely am not on this committee, but I am here because there were some things that were concerning. So first of all, I wanted to go into the agricultural zone. There seems to be always an attempt to disrupt our agricultural areas by putting residential there, which has irritated those in my community because we're constantly having to fight against some text amendment or something that's trying to change the zone in an agricultural zone. So I wanted to ask, based on your knowledge, you did say, I just wanted a clarification of what was being proposed here. So there was an actual amendment that, did you talk about the amendment that was going to bring data centers in the agricultural zone?
No, ma'am, that amendment was not before the planning board at the public hearing. We can talk about it later. We can talk about it now.
Can we talk about it now? Because that is a great concern for my community. We do have a couple, I would even say, one of the controversial issues was one of the properties on Church Road, which actually was originally AG. So imagine that is in the middle of a residential community. Would that be one that we would now put a data centers in the middle of residential communities? I just have a question about that.
Sure, council member, I can address that. So first of all, a little background. Recently, within the last several years, the county council approved data centers as a by right use in a number of zones, in the industrial zones, and in the RR zone, and also in the neighborhood activity center zone. Data centers are not in current law allowed in the agricultural zone. I believe you are referring to one of the amendments that was put forward recently that's before the committee, which is an amendment that would extend that by right development of data centers to the AG zone, which is the agricultural zone that is the predominant zone in the county's rural tier, also known as our rural agricultural area. The planning department is aware that there are one or two properties zoned AG that might in fact be good locations for a data center. We would like to work with you on appropriate language that might facilitate that without opening up all of the AG zone and all of the rural tier to data centers, which we are certain is not what the council would want to see. And so the amendment that's before you is very broad, and we'd like the opportunity to work with you. Mr. Janoga indicated we have 2 more weeks, to look at better options.
Okay, thank you. I would like a list of the AG zones in my district. I just want to make sure that none of them end up in the midst of any residential communities. So whatever way there can be a narrowing of language that would avoid placing them right in the middle of an actual industry. And I did note that there are some districts, like I know District 9 has a lot of large open space, but some parts of my district that are AG are not necessarily as open space, and residential communities are all over. Second, I did want to note, going into that.
Ms. Bouquet?
Yes.
I just want to touch on that. I would recommend you contact the Prince George's County Farm Bureau.
Okay.
They were not aware of this, and I went to their dinner on Saturday. Didn't know about this, but generally speaking, they are concerned about non-farming, non-agricultural uses that drive up the property values and make it difficult for agriculture to continue. So I recommend you contact the Prince George's County Farm Bureau to get their views.
I missed that dinner. Okay. I will definitely reach out. I want to also go into, can you explain to me, allow agricultural residential zone to the residential plan development zone. So can you explain, so would that pretty much allow, because right now I believe is agricultural, is that the one that is one unit per 2 acres? How many units can you put per acre?
In the AR zone, I think there's a 2-acre zone.
Yeah, one per 2 acre. So when you do residential plan development zone, does that change the units per acre?
So, council member, currently in the current law, in the AR zone, which is also an agricultural zone like the AG zone, planned developments are not authorized for any purpose. The agricultural zones were not given the opportunity to have planned developments because in the agricultural zones, the goal is to preserve farming and to keep density to a minimum. We have not seen language, but we are aware that some stakeholders have recommended that the planned development option be available in the AR zone. But since we have not seen language, we're really not in a position to comment in any detail today.
Okay. So that's not something that this committee will be voting on, right? Just to be clear. Because
not today. But
well, I mean, I would ask that you all vote against any type of planned community and in the AR zone. As I noted before, this is a continuous disruption of areas that are not intended for large residential development. And my community is sick of it. they have been, it's bait and switch. They've been brought in the community saying that they would have a certain quality of life, and it's being disrupted. The last part of this I wanted to bring forth was the CGO provision, and I think that's the provision that Councilman Denoga is putting forth. And I do greatly support this because it does allow us to control the development of dense development outside of the planned communities. And I just want to clarify, Tom, we're not talking about CGO that would be in a town center community, right? Not those. Those are exempt from that,
Correct.
right?
Not only does it not apply to the town, well, transit, I'm going to need the help of Chad, but
Center zones.
regional transit zones. But I also want to make the point, the definition of beltway is not the beltway. There's a specific definition that includes regional centers that are outside the beltway.
The definition of inside the beltway, inside the capital beltway in the ordinance is the area inside the beltway plus the municipal corporate boundaries of the city of College Park, town of Glenarden, and town of Farsights might be city of Glenarden. I might be doing them a disservice, but those three municipalities span the beltway. So it doesn't. That definition doesn't touch on the fact that there are centers outside the beltway. You might be thinking more of how the APF recognizes that there are centers outside the beltway.
All right. I just want to, I just want to make a comment here that my support I was definitely, everyone knows that I pushed for a townhome pause last year. And one of the reasons why is because townhome communities were popping up all over my district in places that did not make sense. There was a comment on the dais about redlining. Let me just be honest. The communities that are impacted by this are Black communities. They are people who were given an idea that they would have a residential community where it would be, they wouldn't have certain density, and then they would have actual commercial development. But what I'm seeing is that every CGO option in my district is being considered for townhomes, meaning that everybody is going to be surrounded by housing that does not support does not support the road infrastructure, which is problematic, and is giving developers an option to just put homes everywhere in our community instead of really considering commercial development. So what I think is if it's not in the transit-oriented development, if it's not in the town activity center, if it's not in places that were intended for dense development, I don't see why it needs to have townhomes. However, this provision does not stop townhomes, but it allows a special exception, meaning somewhere where the community can be an active part of the discussion of whether townhomes should be there. It's time for us to plan our communities right and make sure that our residents have the proper quality of life. At this point, my biggest focus is road infrastructure simply because townhomes have been thrown all over my district. In not places that they were intended. We're not talking about Westphalia. We're talking about a small, I had someone trying to bring a townhome in a small 2-lane narrow road that was going to be 300 units there. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. But we have that all over. Anywhere where we have CGO, we have this problem. And every day we have to be worried of what's going to come to our community because of the zoning of CGO. So I ask you all to consider to make sure that this amendment goes through to protect our communities. These are Black communities, and I can bring every one of them. I don't know any of the communities that complain about this that is anywhere but Black and brown communities that feel that people are just using ways to put more housing in their community without thinking of a properly planned community to support them. So I ask that you all support placing restrictions of townhomes and CGOs.
I stand by what I said.
I want to clarify my statement. It took me a couple seconds to realize the CGO doesn't really even apply in town centers because town centers have a town center zoning, so you don't have CGO zones in those centers. So you can still do apartments and townhouses in town centers because that's what you're supposed to do. Yeah, that's one of the things that's lost here. This is not banning townhomes all over the county. Anyway, with that, Mr. Franklin wants to ask some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me just clarify, when are amendments going to be allowed to be offered?
I think we can
Can you
discuss
address
them.
that?
I think we can discuss amendments today, but there are so many potential amendments. We need to come back in a couple weeks. Frankly, we're going to run out of time today. We've
I
got.
don't have any volume.
Oh, Mr. Franklin, can you hear? Mr. Franklin? Mr. Franklin?
I have no volume. I'm sorry. I don't know. I heard Ms. Blagay perfectly clearly. I don't know what's happened now.
Mr. Franklin?
Can you hear this mic?
It's now back. Yes.
Can you hear? Can you hear me? No?
Barely.
Barely?
Barely.
Mr. Franklin, can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Yes.
Apparently only the mics at the end of the dais are working, not in the middle.
Now,
One of those
now
days.
you're going soft.
Mr. Franklin? Mr. Franklin?
I can barely hear you now. I don't know what's going on. It's something changed. Something's changed there.
That's weird. Okay, I'm
Let me-
talking loud into the
Let me get
microphone.
off of- let me try
Mr.
something here. Okay, let's try it again.
Mr. Franklin?
I can hear you better now. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, we have a packed agenda. We're going to run out of time, literally. So the thought was we could discuss or just go over the list of amendments, and then hopefully over the next 2 weeks we can try to work these out and come back in 2 weeks and finish up this bill.
Okay. Because I appreciate the conversation, and I'd like to address the CGO issues as well. I'm against the proposal in this bill, and I have an amendment to eliminate it. I think, just in giving a little bit of background, a little bit of history, because I may have been the only council member here who's currently on the council who was there when these zones were getting created. The CGO zone, as it exists today, wasn't something the council came up with. Wasn't something from the developers or whoever's the boogeyman today. It came from the consultants in collaboration with the planning board staff who created the CGO zone. And they recommended that to the planning board, who then recommended it to us, and they were persuasive in what the CGO zone should be. That's where the CGO zone comes from. Okay? And I will tell you that based on our conversation, that it was intentional that the CGO zone would allow a mix of residential and commercial uses. The intent was that there were a number of properties in the county, both inside and outside the Beltway, that were aging shopping centers that needed to be redeveloped into mixed-use development, because retail does better in mixed-use development than it does in single-use commercial centers. And that has been the trend in the development sector for probably at least 20 if not 30 years. And so it was intentional that the planning board created the CGO zone the way it did and recommended it to us. That's where this all comes from. Now, in terms of the proposal, let's be clear, there are clearly centers that are outside the Beltway. There are areas even beyond the centers, like downtown Largo is even larger than necessarily the regional transit district itself, where it makes sense for CGO to allow for some of these strip commercial centers to transition to mixed use, to allow better retail to come to those centers, and not to just let those centers die. I think you have those opportunities in Largo. I think you have those opportunities in Bowie. I think you have those opportunities in a number of parts of the county. So I bring all that up to say that I understand the interest in making sure that we don't have sprawl in our county, but Prince George's County is not a blank canvas. You can't go back and pretend like we developed all around our metro stations for the last 150 years. We didn't. Okay, we didn't do that. So you now have a number of these strip commercial centers around the county that are going to die. They're dying. And they are going to need to have an opportunity to transition to something that's going to produce better retail and it's going to produce better development and better outcomes for the county. I believe that is why, and the planning board can defend themselves, I believe that is why they created the CGL zone. And so, Mr. Donoga, I think you need to have a conversation with the planning board staff as to why they created the CGL zone, because that is why they created it. It was intentional in order to transition us towards a different kind of development pattern. And earlier when it was mentioned that just a few years ago you couldn't do residential in these commercial areas, that's true. And that was part of the problem in terms of these commercial centers not being allowed to transition. I would say this, and I would yield back the floor. You're lucky that Laurel Mall had a little piece of it that allowed for apartments on site, which then became the Town Center Laurel. Town Center Laurel is a mixed-use development with apartments on site, and I think it's become a much better project than the dying Laurel Mall that it replaced. And I think you're going to see a number of strip centers start to die and need to be replaced and transition with mixed-use development. I will yield back the floor. Mr. Donoga, I do believe council members today would like to make amendments, so you may hear amendments proposed today, because I believe there's
Mr. Chair.
interest in moving some of those amendments. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, thank you. It seems like we have started a debate here now, and I know that we have the public here that wants to speak. I mean, I could debate all day here about a lot of this stuff, but I think that's not the purpose today, because we're going to debate the amendments later. So I want to make sure that we get to the public, because I don't want us to run out of time and shorten the amount of time that residents have to speak.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Ivy?
I'd like to move my amendment, which is on CB-15-2024, on page 7 and line 22, amend the text of 271703 as follows. Applications pending prior to the effective date of this ordinance. You have it in your binder. It would extend the time of the acceptance until April 1st, 2026.
I second.
I found that, in 2018, when this whole thing first came up or was voted on initially, there was a desire to have a 5-year use afterwards. It was given 2. And now after that, of course, we ran into COVID, all the impacts of everyone and everything, and development was not left out of that. So it seems to me that in order to make things a little more reasonable, we've had this period of time to come up with this Omnibus bill, which is long, and yet it's still not everything that every day it seems that new problems are found that need to be corrected. And I think it's important that we continue to work on it. And right now I understand that 40% of the applications that are coming in, is this correct, Mr. Balazs, are under the new ordinance and 60% under the old. I think that's encouraging, actually, and that over time we're going to have more people, more projects coming in under the new ordinance, but forcing it right now seems like a bad idea. We've given so much grace in so many walks of life because of the pandemic, and I don't think we should leave this out. So for that reason, I offer this amendment.
I will second the amendment.
So, Ms. Ivy, I'm a little confused. We're in the middle of... Hello? Hello?
Can you hear? Can people hear this? Yes, Tom.
Check?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. The reason why I was offering it now is because you had just said that you weren't going to take amendments. And so I thought I'd better get mine in because I think I've made it clear.
No, you have made it clear, and I said at the beginning that I didn't want to do amendments today, but we were going to do yours.
Okay, well,
because-
we
because
did
it
have a
was-
second.
And Mr. Franklin indicated that he wants to push through amendments. And I'm going to be clear and blunt. This is a 300-page bill. It's been kicking around. The public has not been engaged. They're getting engaged. And we owe it to the public to do this in a deliberative process because there's a couple hundred revisions to the bill. I have no problem with dealing with your amendment today, but your amendment and the other amendments that come up came out yesterday late afternoon. That's how we're going to run the county council, then that's how we're going to do things. I said I would want to deal with your amendment. I made that commitment, but I'm wondering, is there a committee mutiny and we're just going to do whatever we want to do? I mean, we can go down that road. And I'm not talking about you, Madam Chair. Mr. Franklin just said he wants to push through amendments, and I'm not sure. Are we voting the bill out today? If we're not voting the bill out today, none of these amendments matter. If we're voting the bill out today, I think I don't think it's a good look. But I'm only one vote on the committee, and I wish I could sit in my chair, but I can't. So there's who seconded the motion? Mr. Hawkins. Discussion? Ms. Oriata?
Thank you. I had some questions on the bill, but the chair asked me to hold my questions for the public to speak, and I was okay with that. So I won't ask my questions. I'll focus just on the amendment here, just so I can understand this amendment that we're talking about. It would allow an extension for developers to use the old ordinance till 2026. Just that,
Yes.
or is this like, because I know we did something with use tables, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand, like, this is just overall.
This allows it to be used for 2 more years, just like it's been allowed this last 2 years. The original position had been 5 years, and it's 2 years in the bill, in the law. So I was asking for 2 more years. That still brings it in under a year. And from the beginning, it was the beginning was before I got here, right? And in the beginning, looking back in history, the understanding was always that this would be revisited. And this is the time for that to happen. So I don't think it's coming out of left field.
And I guess, is this a time if we could ask questions to Park and Planning about your thoughts on extending it till 2026?
Certainly. So 2 points. First, we would recommend a 6-month extension. That's our recommendation. Secondly, if the council is going to, or the committee is going to proceed with Ms. Ivy's amendment, we believe the amendment is not actually drafted in the right way to accomplish what she is trying to accomplish. And so if you're going to proceed with this amendment, I would ask that we give Mr. Williams an opportunity to explain where the text of this proposed amendment actually is not, we think, what Ms. Ivy intends.
It's okay with me if it's okay with the chair.
To fix it?
All right, thank you. So we have seen this proposed amendment, and the amendment is located in the wrong location. It's proposed to be placed in 27-1703, which pertains to applications that were pending at the time the new ordinance went into effect. We are unaware of any such application that is still in the books. The proper location for this revision would be in section 27-1901, which is the abrogation of the overlap period, which currently reads that that section, that 2-year that was going to expire April 1, 2024, would be no longer in force in effect 2 years after the effective date. So you would want to change that to 4 years after the effective date, and that will mean April 1, 2026 if you go in that direction, or change it to 2.5 years if you go with what Mr. Perlage recommended. That would be October 1, 2024. So
Thank you. And I'll just say, I think my hope, I don't sit on the committee, as Councilmember Gay mentioned as well, that we have more time to digest the bill. I guess my mic is. Okay. What's that? Because I think understanding like what this would mean and making sure that we hear from the community first before we move forward on this bill. Because my main concern is that we have this balance between wanting to give grace and understanding that there's projects in the queue, but then there's also the idea that, and wasn't me, other councils worked on this big change to try to change what our zoning looked like, trying to move us into what we said was the right direction for development. And if we keep on elongating like that process, are we ever really going to get to the intention? So we have these two tug of wars that are happening, and I understand it's hard to balance it, but that's my main concern. Like, especially for me, I do want to start to see my community change. And so how are we ever going to get to that change unless we hold the businesses and developers accountable to what we're saying we want to see? And so how do we do that? Thank you.
Mr. Olson and then Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope people can hear me. Is that okay? I respectfully, I do not support the amendment. I think that, we have spent many years and much money on this, and Park and Planning has spent a lot of time on this, countless hours of staff time and public engagement. And this is an improvement. There are things that need to be tweaked. There are things that need to be changed, and we do have other amendments. Ideally, we would hold the amendments for later, but I understand Mr. Dernoga made a commitment to hear this amendment today, but I do not support the amendment. I think that in another 2 years, if this goes through, we're just going to see another request for another 2 years, and like we've seen on some of the other things. And I just think at some point we need to make the policy the policy. So I will not be supporting this. Potentially we could come to a compromise, Madam Chair, but I'm not supportive of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Franklin, I'm trying to do committee members, Mr. Harrison. I don't mean to. So we got Mr. Franklin, Ms. Ivy, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in keeping with the trend, I would like to move to amend Councilmember Ivy's amendment to add my proposed amendment that would eliminate the restrictions that this bill places on multifamily townhouse and two-family dwellings in the CGO zone outside the Beltway.
Is there a second?
Madam, Mr. Clerk, I second Mr. Franklin's motion.
Ms. Ivy, are you okay with?
I think that we just need to clarify what my amendment is to make sure I'm more focused on mine right now. I'm a little bit thinking about me. So, Ms. Zabakos, if you could quickly go over mine before we amend onto it. I don't have a problem with the idea of it. I'll say that we have seen our shopping centers struggle, and we know that the way they do better is if there are more people living close to them that can use them. It's so easy to use Amazon that if you have to make any effort, I'll just use Amazon. But if the shopping center's right there, you're more likely to say, I can have it right now if I just run downstairs real quick or run across the street. So I do think that it helps our shopping centers if there are more people living around it. And I've seen we have such a depressed development environment right now. You might think otherwise out in the world, but if you see the number of applications coming in, it's a lot lower than it used to be, and things are just struggling. So to the extent we can do all we can to support our business community as well, so that we are not coming back to the public and asking them for more taxes on their, increase on property tax. We're trying to avoid that. So the way we avoid that is have more money coming in, and part of that is supporting the shopping centers. So I don't have a problem with his proposed amendment as long as it's clear what my amendment is first. So, Ms. Davakos.
Madam Vice Chair, as a point of order, would it be okay, I would like to ask if Mr. Franklin would withdraw his friendly amendment to your motion and Mr. Hawkins to withdraw his friendly amendment just for a moment so that the motion and second that's on the floor.
Mr. Franklin?
I'm fine with that. You're talking about clarifying the right section that your amendment should be amending?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Though Mr. Vargas, you don't have to do it that way. You could just do a second amendment that does that correction. But I'm fine with that.
I'm aware of that. I would like to just clarify this first and then go ahead and do your part, if that's all right with you.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
You have to ask the seconder.
Mr. Hawkins, will you kindly withdraw your second on the friendly amendment to the main motion?
No, I will not.
Thank the
I will
public for showing up
remove my
today. You
second.
can leave now.
Okay, so you do withdraw the second. Okay. So in order to amplify the intent of the amendment, which is proposed by Council Chair Ivy, Vice Chair Ivy of the committee, which appears on page 389 of your virtual binder, there would be an additional portion to the proposed amendment that would be new language added to page 12 after line 20. It would be inserting an amendment to section 27-1901 to extend the time for prior ordinance access until April 1, 2026. So with that, that would complete the intention of your will to move to extend the time for prior ordinance access.
Thank you. And do we need to second that again?
Now that that is in play, if that is your will, you may move and it may be seconded.
I would like to move the amendment as outlined by Karen Zavakos.
I will make this.
Oh, Mr. Franklin, okay.
Mr. Hawkins, you had your hand up?
I don't need to speak, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate for Mr. Franklin's friendly amendment?
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can y'all hear me? Okay. I just wanted to first and foremost, I know that we're talking about different amendments this morning, and I have an amendment, a proposed amendment in here, and I know Mr. Denoga, the chair, wanted to talk about some of these amendments on a later date. So I do have an amendment to my proposed amendment. I was a little late for the meeting. I'm not a member of this committee, so I don't actually have a vote. But we can deal with that in 2 weeks. But I do want to speak about the transitional period and the expiration date. When I was on the council before, I do recall the 5 years being spoken about. This new date that we're coming up to, we all know that we were coming up to it. When we hear from our subject matter experts in our community, our development community, and they're saying that there's pause, that this could cause catastrophic challenges for our county, we need to listen to that. I do believe more time is needed. I know that I've had the opportunity to meet with Chairman Shapiro and staff as well. We proposed the 2 years as an amendment to this. I do believe there needs to be some more work group folks that need to focus on this. Mr. Chair, I appreciate your advocacy. You've been working on this omnibus bill for a minute, but that is you and only you been working with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning. We do need to get other members of our community that play a role in this to be able to speak to some of the amendments. And the only way we're going to do that is getting everyone to the table. So I do believe that we're at a time now where we don't have any more time and a tough decision needs to be made. So I support Chair Ivy's amendment, even though I don't have a vote on it. And I support the second, that we need to have a 2 years extension on the transitional period. Thank you.
Ms. Zuriaba.
And I would like to, I do agree that there should be a pause on any voting on this today until we get clarification. I did hear Councilman Franklin's comments, and I do want to note this because I'm not seeing what you're seeing. When we talk about CGO and dying community centers, there seems to be an option that if we put residential closer to the commercial and the CGO, it would liven it. The reality is that developers are not proposing any retail. They are changing all of these CGOs to housing. That's what I'm seeing. And I'm looking at the plans myself. So when I'm looking at trying to fight to get retail at Beech Tree, and I've got a developer telling me that they're going to just put townhomes there, that's what I'm seeing. Not bringing anything closer to retail, wiping out retail for housing. So at this point, I think that if we're going to pause, instead of extending this, because what we're doing is putting people in communities where they think that they're going to be the CGO. The point of the mixed use or the MXT that became CGO was that there would be retail there. There is no retail. That's why I'm here. That is why I put the townhome pause. That's why I've been so much about this, because people are going to leave my community if they feel that there's going to be a shopping center that now turns into a bunch of apartments and townhome, and that's what I'm fighting right now. So the way we can do this is that there might be a pause on this, and we look at an option that will require that if a developer in a CGO zone is going to bring residential, they must bring commercial. And if they don't bring commercial, then they can't do the residential. So that's the way we could do it. We could change that. That way, I can agree with that, because if somebody's going to bring townhomes, they would have to bring residential too. But what we're seeing is that every CGO, the developer is only putting forth plans that shows nothing but housing and nothing else. So that is something that we need to consider here. And I hope you all, as you all extending the time, these tables, the MXT, to some of the properties, I'm going to bring my community here so you can tell them why they're going to see a bunch of townhomes in the middle of a community that they were once going to see commercial. Or the fact that commercial is going to be wiped out for nothing but residential. I'm seeing this myself, and I'm not sure what others are seeing, but I just want to note that.
I'd like to call the question.
More debate.
Well, we have a motion for a 2-year extension, and we've had voluminous discussion, and it's noon, and the public hasn't had the opportunity to say one word. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Well, point of order, Mr. Chair. You could call the question as a motion. You can't call the question as one person.
I think as chair, I can move. We have a motion and a second. We've had discussion.
Correct, but no, Mr. Chair, that's not correct in terms of rules of procedure. No, sir.
Just withdraw the call.
Question to shut debate off.
No, yeah.
It's a motion that requires a vote. There's still folks who want to talk, so you can't just close debate off.
I didn't know you wanted to talk, Mr. Franklin. I didn't see any. Mr. Franklin, I let you speak. I didn't know you wanted to speak again.
I had an additional comment to make.
I didn't know that. You've been texting me. I didn't see a text from you. So it was an error. But I think it's important. Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned about where things are right now. The public has been sitting here for 2 hours, hasn't had an opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
I don't even know, Ms. Zavakis, do we have two amendments that have been merged now, or are we voting on two amendments? The original one about the 2 years and the CGO, is that what's in front of us now?
At present, you have a motion and a second on the floor for the 2-year extension as revised with my additional. Now,
I'm sorry, what about the CGO amendment that Mr. Franklin had? Is that attached to that now? Is that in front of us?
It is not at the moment, but it's not that it could not be. If someone were to move it, it would be.
Oh, I thought Mr. Hawkins did not withdraw his second, so I thought it was part of.
He did.
He did withdraw his second. Okay, thank you. I didn't catch that. Okay, I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I make a friendly motion to propose the amendment that Mr. Franklin spoke of earlier on page 200 at line 7, amend the principal use regulation of section 27-5102C concerning multifamily dwelling household living uses as follows. Dwelling multifamily in the CGO zone, multifamily dwellings should only be permitted in CGO zone inside the 10 capital beltway and should not be permitted outside the beltway. To dwelling townhomes in the CGO zone should be permitted inside the beltway and should not be permitted outside the beltway. We want to amend that.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. The motion as amended is now before the committee.
I guess there's discussion.
More discussion.
All right,
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Unless I'm thrown out by security, I think it's inappropriate and outrageous conduct to have this continue without hearing from the public. So I'm going to the speakers list. Going to the speakers list.
Yes.
Cheryl Court, you've got a soft 2 minutes. And we're going to go down the speakers list. I was going to give everyone 3 minutes, but it's afternoon. Pardon me?
Point of order, sir. There's a motion and a second on the floor. The debate is limited to the members of the committee and other members.
Well, the motions came out of order to begin with because I'd already laid out the schedule. I'm letting, like I said, you can have security throw me out. You don't want to hear from the public, Mr. Harrison?
Well, if you call the roll, it would only take but a second.
The community should speak.
Ms. Court, please speak. Harrison, you're upset that the public gets to speak? That's just plenty.
I'm not upset about the public doesn't speak. I'm upset that your colleagues have made a motion, and when you make motions, Mr. Denoga, people follow the course of action when that motion's been made. Don't try to.
I set the agenda at the beginning.
Don't try to vilify your colleagues because they made a motion on the floor, which has been seconded, and point of order is now it needs to be called. You have a motion, an action, a course of action on the floor.
Tom, let the community speak.
Yeah, I'm letting the community speak. If my colleagues want to be outrageous and embarrass this county on video because the development industry is back here pulling strings, then my colleagues can do that. But I'm letting the public speak.
Good job.
So you're not going to. Mr. Chair, you know you're out of order. It would take less than 2 minutes to get the vote, and then we can move on.
Tom, let the community speak.
Ms. Court?
I'll be brief. I've been involved with Prince George's planning and zoning for many years. We were part of the Plan 2035. We're part of the zoning rewrite. We support moving forward with the Omnibus bill. We are particularly excited about increasing the baseline residential densities for transit-oriented and activity center zones. We are concerned about the proposed amendments to delay implementation, to cite data centers in agricultural zones, and to remove any restrictions on CGO outside the Beltway. We think that the zoning code as proposed in the Omnibus bill, moves us forward in achieving the transit-oriented economic development and quality of life goals of Plan 2035. Thank you. We can't hear you.
Marva Jo Camp, followed by Janet Gingold.
I had my words ready for the 3 minutes, so bear with me. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Marva Jo Camp. I am an attorney in private practice. I am also an over 50-year resident of Prince George's County. And I really want to say I get more and more frustrated that we separate community. Community are developers, community are residents. We all care about this community, and I think we need to look at it holistically. I do want to say that I had the opportunity to be one of the first. I have submitted cases under the old zoning ordinance, and I was the first to have number 1 and number 2 under the new. What became very, very clear to me is that we need more time and we need more eyes. I commend this council, I commend the planning staff, the planning board, and staff in general for the effort, yeoman's effort that they have made to adjust this monumental task of a new zoning ordinance. This omnibus bill is wonderful, and so I take nothing away. But I also know, having gone through and now having had a court case, that there is a lot to still be determined in terms of interpretation of what is in both the original new zoning ordinance and also in the omnibus bill. I think we would be very much benefited by having a work group that includes community people and the development community, that I'm saying community. And I also think that we should have more time, and having that additional 2 years as recommended by Council Chair Ivy would be significant. We have worked so hard on this omnibus bill and on this new zoning ordinance. We want to get it right. Give us the time to make sure that that transition, it is what was anticipated as we spent how many years, 8 years trying to come up with a new, maybe 30 years because it's been going back and forth. But the point is, it is a lot. And to ask us in this short time for 300 pages to get it all and just starting, I think it's a lot to ask. And given that additional two years to make sure that transition is smooth, I think benefits everybody. And again, I say benefits the community, which includes all of us, not some of us. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Janet Gingold. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Prince George's County Sierra Club. Prince George's County Sierra Club supports most of CB-15-2024 and offers some suggestions that we believe will help our county better realize the goals of the zoning rewrite, Plan 2035, and the Climate Action Plan. We need a zoning ordinance that will guide and control development so that we can meet the needs of our growing population while also curbing sprawl to decrease vehicle miles traveled and minimize adverse effects on the environment and on the county budget. Most important, we firmly oppose extending the timelines under which the old zoning ordinance can be used, both for new applications and for existing properties choosing to use the old usage tables. Those wanting to develop in our property have had over 5 years since 2018 to adapt to and prepare for using the new ordinance. Further extension of the transition period is unwarranted. 2 sets of rules create unnecessary complexity and confusion. Prolonging the use of the old ordinance will delay realizing the benefits of the new ordinance and place unfair financial and environmental burdens on Prince George's County taxpayers. Enough is enough. Just say no. Next, we want to see increased density in transit-oriented areas and limits on increasing residential development in areas outside the Beltway. Still, we recognize that carefully planned, walkable, bikeable communities near transit facilities and employment opportunities outside the Beltway might also be sustainable assets for our county in the future. Therefore, we support the amendment allowing multifamily, two-family, and townhouse dwellings in the CGO zone outside the Capital Beltway only by rezoning to a planned development zone. However, we strongly oppose the proposed amendment that would allow these residential uses on CGO properties less than 25 acres with the approval of a special exception. This exemption of smaller properties from the plan development process would seriously undermine the goals of curbing sprawl and decreasing vehicle miles traveled. We support the addition of specified public benefits for planned development zones. We hope that this will encourage developments planned for sustainability, equity, climate resilience, and public health. We appreciate inclusion of affordable housing options, improved stormwater management, gardens and multimodal transport improvements. However, we also want to see more public benefit elements that support climate resilience and climate mitigation. Please see our written comments for more details. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gingold. At this point, my colleagues are insisting that I'm out of order by allowing the public to speak. So,
Wow.
Looking at the rules, public discussion is not permitted during deliberations on a question. So we're not going to hear from the public at this time. However, the rules also provide in Rule 9.5 for division of the question. Any council member can ask for division of the question. So even though there was an attempt to combine those 2 points, I'm asking that we divide the question and we vote on the original motion, Ms. Ivy's 2-year extension.
Now, in so doing, point of order, sir, in so doing, that would automatically put the second half of the question before you. It does not make it go away. So a roll call vote on that second portion is in order immediately following the first part.
I understand, and we can move forward on that without public comment if that's what the council wishes. So on the first portion of the question, do your question.
All right, you're asking for the roll? So you've moved, any member may move, or not, excuse me, any member may divide the question into smaller portions. By your expression, you are saying to me that you are asking that the question be divided. The question being so divided into the part that it deals with for the 2-year extension. If that is your wish, then you may ask the clerk to call the roll on that portion of the question.
Madam Clerk?
Chair Denoga,
Respectfully, no.
Vice Chair Ivy,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Before I vote, point of information, Ms. Savakos, the division of the question isn't a motion in and of itself?
It is not.
Okay, I'm now on the rules in front of me, so I can't. Okay, so this is just a vote on the 2-year extension?
Yes, with an immediate, which will automatically put the portion about the CGO, multifamily, 2-family, and townhouse dwellings before the body, right for a vote without additional discussion.
So this is a vote on the CGO proposal.
This is a vote on the 2-year extension, and immediately after this vote will be a vote on the portion that you moved in.
I'm sorry, Ms. Savakos.
Stand up and be counted, exactly.
Folks, can Ms.
Because we will not be silenced.
Look at our faces.
Thank you.
Yes.
You
We
should
stand
not
strong
be silenced.
and we will not be silenced.
You should not be silenced.
We should not be? No, we won't be.
Folks,
It smells.
as much as I support your outrage, please do not do this.
Fine.
Thank
do
you
not.
for thank
I
you for
appreciate
this.
your opinion.
Thank you for standing up. Thank you for standing up.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. I don't want to run the meeting for you, but if you, I think the problem was that there wasn't an original motion to move favorable on the bill in the first place, and so because there wasn't an original motion, you could have had public comment then, and then moved the bill favorably,
Right.
and then had amendments made at that point. I think what happened was there wasn't a good plan for the order of how that all was going to go.
Mr. Franklin, I laid out a plan.
I'm not sure how to get out of all of that, but that was probably the right way to do it based on how we do bills in the past.
I just want to say that the chair
Mr.
did
Franklin, have you cast a vote?
Excuse me, Karen. I wanted to say that the chair did lay out the agenda, and he did clearly state that he wanted to do public comment and then go to the amendment. So I just want to make sure that he said that he would vote on this amendment. He did say that he wanted to have public comment. So those two things were always planned to happen, and the meeting went the way it went, but I just want to say that that was what was stated.
That was not the appropriate way to do it. If Mr. Chair, if you wanted to vote on Ms. Ivy's amendment and you made a commitment to do so, the right way to do it would have been to move the bill first and then have her amend the bill.
We would have moved
And
it.
then we could go to the other amendments, but you could have had the public speak before all of that.
We were invited to come down here and offer testimony.
Right.
We were invited to file written comments. We took time away from our jobs and other things we needed to get to do. If you were going to run this process like this, Mr. Franklin,
Then they could.
then why have a public hearing at all? Why have a public hearing at all? Thank you.
Right, your comments at this point
Mr. Smith,
are
please sit
important.
down.
The roll call proceeds. Mr. Franklin.
Bravo, aye.
Okay.
Chair, Councilmember Hawkins?
Madam Clerk, as I look out at those who wanted me to look at them when I vote aye.
Councilmember Olson?
No.
Motion carries 3-2.
As to the second portion.
Moving on to the second portion, and I'm just going to, well, on discussion on that, my position is clear, but I'm bothered by Mr. Franklin's comment that I didn't run the meeting properly. I'm running the meeting the way we've always run meetings. It's just that a motion came out of the blue because people don't want to wait till the public speaks, and that everything's run downhill because then another motion came and more motions came, and I guess we're going to see more motions. The sad part was I was happy to deal with these motions in due course, but we are where we are, and if we're going to vote on the CGO portion without hearing from the public, I'm just curious, are we planning on voting the whole bill out today?
Tom, don't do this without the community saying something.
I just don't see.
This is not right to them.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bouguet.
I said, don't vote this bill out without hearing from the community. It is insulting for our residents to come here and be
Mr.
silent.
Dodola, can we hear from the committee members so we can move on? You say you want us to hear from the public, so let's do it.
I thought I should comment on this particular item. So I'm just trying to figure out, Mr. Hawkins, you have helped hijack the meeting, okay? The meeting's been hijacked. And it's been hijacked for all those people who are supporting your political campaigns out there. That's who's hijacked this meeting. So if we're going to go down this, I'm just trying to figure out since it's been
Now
hijacked.
you're being disrespectful.
Exactly,
Now you're
what
being
is the-
disrespectful.
I'm the
Now
chair-
you're
I'm
being
the
disrespectful.
chair,
Now you're being disrespectful. You sit out and email to all these people attacking us when all we're doing is going through the process.
No, you're not.
That's
No,
what
you're
we're
not.
doing.
Excuse me,
Mr. Chair,
if-
point of order, point of order,
If I
point of
could-
order.
Let the
Point of order.
community
This is
Point of order.
not,
Vote.
Point of order.
no
Point of
one can
order.
disparage each other. It is not allowed. It
Madam
is
Chair, I
actually in
stand
the
corrected.
council rules.
Point of order,
I
Mr. Chair.
apologize.
Oh, yeah.
Madam
Yeah.
Clerk, please call the roll.
No, no
Let the
one,
community speak.
no one.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I believe that takes privilege. Does it not? Thank you. Can we, I believe there's a motion in front of us.
Correct.
Can we deal with that and then go back to the public? And
Yes,
then,
the roll call's in order.
and then may I suggest, I know you're the chair, then may I suggest that we take up the rest of this at a future meeting?
Madam Clerk?
Chair Denoga?
No.
Vice Chair Ivy?
Aye.
Councilmember Franklin?
Aye.
Councilmember Hawkins?
Madam Clerk, I vote aye.
Councilmember Olson?
No.
Motion carries 3-2.
Moving back to the public comments, since there's no motions on the floor.
Just the last one.
Nate Foreman, Margaret Bowles.
Nate Foreman first, Mrs. Bowles.
Oh, sorry. Where's Nate?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and other council members who are here today. I do want to say I appreciate the work that everyone has gone to in understanding how the county functions and the development and how it can help the county move forward economically and just. So I do want to say that I appreciate the conversations that have happened around this omnibus bill, and the concerns we've had involve really that this bill is kind of be a technical amendments, and really we're looking forward to how, because the zoning ordinance was so old, we had to, and we adopted a new ordinance, we adopted it in a vacuum, we didn't know how it was going to operate. So there was supposed to be ideas for the technical corrections to understand how this bill would actually function. And we have been working with Park and Planning staff over the last year to develop this bill in a certain way. And the new amendments, the new version was brought forward this year, and we didn't have a chance to really look at it until it was already dropped and brought on presentation. So I guess what I will finish with and just say is that we believe that this bill should move forward, but with the technical corrections, and I believe that is in the form that is being approved today. So I guess I should say who I am. Nate Foreman with the Maryland Building Industry, and also on behalf of some clients. Thank you.
Ms. Bowles, followed by Casey Anderson.
Good morning, members of the council and fellow citizens of Prince George's County. I'm speaking today about accountability, safety, respect for Plans 2035, the zoning rewrite, and logical environmental planning. I worked with planners. Many of our fellow citizens also helped design the zoning rewrite, the plans for 2035. We attended many meetings, and I'm also a proponent for smarter growth and the Climate Action Plan. Most of you were elected because we thought that you were more forward-looking than past council members, more respectful of knowledgeable development for the 21st century, and transit-oriented development that would benefit our county and all of its citizens. Looking to the future does not mean bowing to every thought of developers or their wishes, but investigating what is sustainable, environmentally friendly, wisely regulated development for economic growth for our county and our state. Please, piecemeal zoning. Excuse me, I'm 84 years old. I've been in this county for 65 years. Piecemeal zoning or piecemeal development without proper infrastructure and transportation support is not the answer. We must oppose extending the time frame of use for old ordinances, as we have heard that many developers are proposing, plus many council members. They have had 5 years to address these issues and to learn about the zoning rewrite. It is time to say no to overdevelopment and that is outside of the public transit zones. No to low quality and no to urban sprawl outside of the Beltway. I guess that's probably my time.
Yes, Ms. Bowles.
Bye.
I'm doing a soft 2 minutes because passions are high. Mr. Anderson?
Hello, thanks for the opportunity to testify. I'm Casey Anderson with Rogers Consulting, where our offices are located just down the street at 1101 Mercantile Lane. I wanted to put in a word in defense of floating zones for AR property that was transitioned from the RA zone under the pre-2018 regime. I won't call it a separate zoning code in deference to the Chief Principal Counsel's instruction on the continuity between the old and the new versions of the code. But in any case, it used to be that under the RA zone, which was a 1 lot per 2 acre zone, those properties were eligible to apply for a floating zone for slightly higher intensity of use under the pre-2018 rules. That was rather abruptly changed. It came as a surprise to some property owners who are planning to apply for those rezonings, and those rezonings are not only consistent in many cases with the area master plans, but they're actually necessary in order to achieve the densities that were called for in those master plans. For example, if you have a master plan that calls for low density residential zoning, say three lots per acre, but the base zone that it's supplied in as a result of the map amendment when the master plan is adopted applies an RA zone, which is transitioned to AR, which would be 1 lot per 2 acres. You need to be able to have the floating zone in order to achieve the density that's called for in the master plan. So I think contrary to the suggestion that has been made that this is somehow some sort of attempt to sneak something more intensive use into a property that was not well planned or contemplated pre-2018. To the contrary, it's important to modify the post-2018 version of the code to allow those types of floating zones to be applied, namely under the new version that's RPD. I know that's very technical, it's confusing, but it's very similar to the CGO issue, and we hope that at some point in the next several months you can take up an amendment to accommodate that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Melissa Daston, followed by Robert Antonetti and Andrew Rao.
For the record, my name is Melissa Daston, and I'm representing the District 1 Movers and Shakers. We represent 10,000 homes from North College Park, north to West Laurel, east to Vansville, and west to Adelphi. It's 10,000 homes and about 20 some odd thousand registered voters. Collectively, our citizen leaders have contributed over 200 years of volunteer service to this county. We support CB-15-2024 as introduced without the Planning Board and Council proposed amendments. We believe the last-minute nature and the delicate or the number of amendments need much more research and input from citizens before a vote is held, even if within 2 weeks. The bill has elements, some of which we agree with and others we are less sanguine about. The specific items which we support focus on controlled, quality development in accordance with approved plans that optimize our county's most valuable asset, developable land. Specifically, 1, stop allowing developers to choose between prior and current zoning ordinance. They have plenty of time to adapt. We, as citizens, cannot handle dealing with 2, and we are not aware of what happens. The transition needs to happen on schedule, most respectfully. Support transit-oriented growth and stop the sprawl. Current development, non-transit development outside the Beltway, as Councilwoman Blier has said, has created demands on safety, libraries, infrastructure, and things that the county can ill afford. By right, remove no by right residential construction in the CGO zone entirely. It should be open for discussion and require proposal. Limit to high density development to where appropriate. Cost analysis done by professional planners document that high density townhouses and multifamily development create more costs for local governments than they generate in tax revenue. So for every townhouse and multifamily built, we are digging ourselves deeper. And one last point. In a 2-year period, it's not the number of applications filed, but the number of units filed for. In a 2-year period, the county approved 23,000 new multifamily and townhouses and only 2,600 single-family homes. We are not anti-development. We support the plans that were approved with constituent input, not this rather bizarre process that we are a part of today. Thank you.
Mr. Anthony knows he's next. Then Mr. Rao and Mr. Tedesco.
Good afternoon, Chair Denoga, members of the committee, members of the council. My name is Robert Antonetti with the law firm of Shipley & Horn, with offices in Largo, Maryland. I've had the blessing of practicing in the area of land use in this county for the past 23 years. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today on this bill. My time is limited, so I'll be concise. In 2018, when the new ordinance was passed, we were told there would be numerous opportunities for substantive updates to that legislation. Fast forward today, 6 years later, we now have CB-15-2024. There is many items in this bill. It is a very long bill. It's 286 pages long, as you've heard today. Even from last year, when there was CB-73-2023, there's been an increase. I counted roughly 90 some changes from the bill that was introduced and held last year to the version this year. I make all these points to basically state that some of these changes are good and positive and necessary. Others, I think, need some additional work. We heard today about the CGO zone. I appreciate the amendment. I am opposed to it. The CGO zone calls for a mix of uses. The uses that are allowed are even allowed by the general plan outside of regional transit districts. I think more work needs to be done to discuss items like this outside of this space. This is a very dense space to have this discussion in order to have a meaningful reaction to it and have meaningful input. I would recommend two things. One, as you heard, a task force be formed to discuss these items in greater detail so we can have a bill, perhaps by the fall, the first of maybe several omnibus bills to address this issue or these issues presented here today in this bill. I also support the 2-year extension for the ability to use the prior ordinance while the new one is being refined and improved so it functions most efficiently. I do appreciate your attention and your support of this. This legislation is probably the most important zoning legislation in my lifetime, and we have to get it right. So I appreciate the ability to take more time to do just that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Mr. Roud?
Started with good morning. I'll change it to good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. My name is Andrew Roud with St. John Properties. I'd like to just briefly mention something like Melford. Melford is by definition a legacy project. It's 24 years old. It's been developing over time. It's a key component to the Bowie Local Town Center and the general plan. It's comprised of over 1.5 million square feet of office, flex, and R&D with a cap value in excess of $1.5 billion. Now it's evolved into Melford Town Center with the addition of retail and residential. It is the largest employment center and taxpayer in the city of Bowie, which is the largest city in the county, as you know. As a legacy project, it's carefully planned, vetted, and entitled with under the MXT framework. So with the transitional provisions, just also by definition, if we're now into the point of an omnibus bill in the 200-page area, we're not saying that anything's wrong with it at all, or making comments on people that are for it, against it, all of my previous speakers. All we need to do is let us choose between the old and the new while we're trying to work it out with staff. We need to do that to get it right. Many of you have been reading with where we are with finance, global finance. It is so bad out there. When people are talking about the purple line, what I can tell you is the large banks in the United States, and we're one of the biggest companies in Mid-Atlantic, they are not lending on commercial real estate. That's a fact. They're not lending on commercial real estate. Now Basel III is being talked about, and that's leveling it down to the smaller banks. The capital markets are drying up. So with that being going on, and then there's uncertainty, and words matter. So if we're looking at the zoning code and it says something and it's not quite defined, there's an army of lawyers in New York and all the capital markets looking at it saying, well, look, we have this to deal with. We don't know what that means. All we're asking for is a time frame to work with staff and the other folks out here and try to get that thing worked out. We need predictability. The financial markets are bad. I'm willing to bet the blue line corridor, I don't know where anybody's getting money. Commercial office lending is dead. Deader than dead than dead. And that's the big banks. Now wait till they get into the smaller banks with Basel III. It's a big problem. So we're just asking for time to work it out collaboratively with people in my world, people from I don't want to use the opposition, but right now I can't think of the word, but have us all together in a room and work it out. I think it benefits everybody, and the county is too important not to let it be done right.
Thank you, Mr. Roud. Great suggestion. Mr. Tedesco, then Joanne Hay, John Robinson.
Good afternoon, members of the council, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me allowing me the opportunity to speak today. For the record, Matthew Tedesco with the law firm of McNamee Hosey in Greenbelt. Obviously, a lot has transpired today, so I had a different kind of presentation prepared than I think what I'm ultimately going to say. I think we can all, everybody in this room, agree that we all want the same thing. At least I think we do. We all want to see the goals and the purposes and the policies of the new zoning ordinance and the new subdivision regulations realized. To have an ordinance that moves Prince George's County into the 21st century and beyond, an ordinance that is easy to understand and administer, and an ordinance that facilitates smart growth and economic development in the county. Respectfully, and with all due respect to staff, we're just not there yet. And I think by touting the zoning ordinance says it needs some minor amendments, it needs this, it needs that. That's true, but it needs major revisions and amendments. And what we stand before you in the development community and the practitioners of the zoning ordinance is because there are inherent conflicts within the current zoning ordinance, a lot of which are being addressed with this omnibus bill, some of which are not. To and include, in particular, consistency with master plan and conformance with master plans. There was a lot of talk today about the CGO zone and just rezone it to PD or get a special exception. The problem with that is the PD zone requires conformance to the master plan. We have 43 master plans in this county, 43, of which 41 were adopted prior to the countywide map amendment and prior to the effectuation date of the zoning ordinance. 41 out of the 43. None of those master plans, the 41, all of them, none of them contemplated 21st century zoning ordinance. But yet we are required to conform either at a special exception, a PD, and now at a detailed site plan to conform to master plans that are outdated. So to argue that we'll just get a special exception, just rezone it, when you can't get that approved because you got to conform to a master plan that doesn't address Plan 2035 or the new zoning ordinance requirements and didn't have land use policies in place that envisioned a mix of uses, it's a little bit of a red herring. All that being said, I do agree with Mr. Antonetti and comments you may hear later. We need time. A work group would be more appropriate. Work through all these issues collaboratively with the entire community, as Ms. Camp indicated. The community does include the development community who invests hundreds of millions of dollars into this county. So with that, members of the council, thank you so much for your time. It's a very important issue and one that needs more debate and more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tedesco. And you actually made one of my points for me, which is with the master plans not having been updated, CGO has not been factored into where they should be located because none of those sites allowed residential in the past. But not to belabor, let's move on to Ms. Hay, John Robinson, Carol Lightfoot.
Hello, my name is John Robinson. I'm a resident of Cool Spring Terrace Civic Association in Adelphi. I'm also a member of the Sierra Club. I was going to say I trust that you all read my written testimony, but seems that a lot of what the citizens have to say gets ignored. I'd like to give a brief quote from Kenneth Boulding, an economist late of the University of Colorado. Anyone who believes in infinite growth of anything real on a finite planet is either a fool or an economist. Development has just been increasing our county's debt in taxes and infrastructure, public services and schools. Prince George's is already the low rent area of the DMV. I notice this when I go to Montgomery County in the morning. There's a traffic jam of people leaving Prince George's County going to work. I notice this if I happen to be coming back home in the afternoon because I notice everybody's coming back from work to Prince George's County. Prince George's County, 75% of the property tax revenue comes from residences. So what's happening is the development industry is pulling millions, billions of dollars out of this county over the decades, and the citizens end up paying the bill with higher property taxes. Prince George's County has the highest property taxes of any county in Maryland. We have inadequate infrastructure. The amount of that infrastructure that gets paid for by developer fees is tiny compared to what the taxpayers have to pay. I mean, and the conduct of this meeting was just disgusting. I mean, it's appalling.
Mrs. Lightfoot? Oh, I saw her. She must have had to go. Peter Goldsmith, followed by Arthur Horn and Tom Howler and Ed Gibbs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Peter Goldsmith here on behalf of Seven Springs Village LLC, an affiliate of Ross Development and Investment, the long-term owners of Seven Spring Apartments located in College Park and Councilmanic District 1. What we're about to discuss is a very technical concept, and that's how density, residential density is calculated in the county, and it requires more than 2 minutes, but I do thank the chair for his interest in this issue and interest in what happened here. Residential density in the county is calculated based on net lot area instead of gross area, and which means that property owners who want to develop their properties will not get credit, at least with respect to density, for any part of the property in the 100-year floodplain, and that's even if all the proposed development is sited outside the floodplain. And I know the word floodplain is a politically charged word, and for good reason, but what I'm discussing here has nothing to do with actually building in the floodplain. And so if the 100-year floodplain is used as a factor for calculating residential density, that means a property containing significant developable area outside of the floodplain could, for all practical purposes, be downzoned without any meaningful notice to a property owner if DPI changes the factors affecting the floodplain delineation. And that's exactly what happened here with Seven Springs after the owner had invested in initial engineering. We had a pre-application meeting with planning staff and had already begun the process of setting up neighborhood meetings. And so with the stroke of the DPI director's pen, which admittedly was probably correct, by signing the technogram that changed the factor calculating the floodplain delineation, Seven Springs proposed development, which was going to be at the highest point of the property, furthest away from the floodplain, effectively lost a couple hundred units and ending the prospect of any redevelopment. And so I think that's unfair to property owners. And it could inhibit the county's goals of concentrating housing in certain metro areas within the floodplain. And so I do respectfully ask the committee to recommend considering changing the density calculation from net to gross, at least under certain circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goldsmith. I know we want to get to see that redevelopment occur, so we will see what we can do. Mr. Horn?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Committee Chairman Denoga, members of the committee. For the record, Arthur Horn, the law office of Shipley and Horn in Largo, Maryland. In the interest of time, I'll be very brief because I just will align myself with the statements of the MBIA and my fellow colleagues in the land use bar, especially Ms. Marva Jo Camp. As part of the speech I had as well, I was saying, in order to achieve what I believe we all want to achieve, is that it will take a collaborative effort for both the public and the private sectors, as well as we all want to achieve the same goal of commercial and residential development of equality in the county. I don't like the divisiveness I've seen. I'm over a 50-year resident of Prince George's County. I've lived here, my business is here, my church is here, everything is here in Prince George's County. And I think Chair Ivy has said it, we can be cooperative in our efforts and not have to, we can disagree without being disagreeable. This, the zoning ordinance that exists now, the new zoning ordinance, has issues, and we know it has issues because we're utilizing it, we're practicing it. And the Omnibus bill is a chance for us to try to resolve some of those issues. You can't resolve it in isolation, and you can't resolve it with just a few people dealing with it. We have to have a group to sit down and go over all the things that we've come across. For instance, it was mentioned earlier that now in some of the DSPs, you have to be consistent with the general plan or APCO master plan. Well, when there's only been two master plans that have been approved since the time of the CSP. There's plenty of discussion concerning the CGO. I will just align myself and say I appreciate the motions that were here today to extend it 2 years and to then not limit the CGO zone. Thank you very much.
Mr. Haller, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the council. Thomas Haller, I'm an attorney with offices here in Largo, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I did submit 4 letters into the record related to CB-15, and so that my testimony is in the record, but I do want to highlight a few things about those letters. 3 of the letters related to specific clients who had anticipated using the new ordinance but have run into issues with the implementation, the actual ability to be able to utilize it. And I think that those letters give an idea of some of the problems that we're running into that need to be addressed by either this omnibus bill or a future omnibus bill. The 4th letter we submitted specifically relates to the transitional provisions, which I'll talk about in a minute. I did submit a letter with regard to the CGO zone, and since the council's taken a vote on that today, I won't go into that, but my letter is in the record. The council wishes to review it. One of the requests that we had made relates to a client who has purchased a property to develop it, and the property was intentionally designed to accommodate a future addition under the new ordinance. However, in trying to file an application to introduce the new ordinance, we found conflicts between the new ordinance and the ability to work with an existing development. And they specifically relate to neighborhood compatibility standards. And so we've proposed some revisions to the neighborhood compatibility standards. These are revisions that were originally proffered by MBIA, but were not included in CB-73 last year, and we're requesting that they be considered. I also have another client who is trying to develop a small property, and staff discussed it earlier about the issue with regard to the open space set-asides. The open space set-asides require that property be placed in common space, not in lots as open space, which would force a small subdivision of, say, 5 or 10 units to actually have a homeowners association and to own a piece of property, which we think is untenable. And then the last issue I wanted to mention was the transitional provisions. We are continuing to work with Park and Planning on those. We think we're very close to having a resolution on the transitional provisions, but I think we share the same goal, which is to protect the investment that people made in properties under the old ordinance and not put them in a position where they cannot utilize the property. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Haller, I think it'd be good if we could try to wrap up the transitional provisions before we complete.
We totally agree.
So,
We're very close to it as well.
Yeah, I'd like to, maybe Ms. Ivy wants to sit in on that. I know it's technical, but we could try to wrap that up. I think everybody, that's probably the biggest issue out there, as somebody said.
Okay, thank you.
Am I on? I didn't get called. I just want to make sure that I
called you.
You told me I would be called, but thank you very much. So, Committee Chair Dernoga, Council Chair Ivy, members of the Council, Edward Gibbs, an attorney with offices in Largo. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to diverge from my prepared thoughts. I will say this. Respectfully, people can have differing opinions. I do remember in about 2017 sitting in room 2027 in the County Administration Building, and at that time, Council Chair Glaros and Vice Chair Olson were there, and many of us were talking about, I think you were Vice Chair at that point. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Not with Glaros,
but
they're the same district.
But Chair Glaros was there, and we were discussing the new, and maybe it was Mr. Turner, yes. We were discussing the new ordinance that was about to be introduced via CB-13 of 2018. And we talked about the need for some period of time to have access to the old code for any purpose because of the unexpected problems you would have in the new ordinance. And a suggestion came, would you be satisfied with 5 years? We said yes. When CB-13 was presented, it was 2 years with a caveat. It could be amended. So the 5 years or needing more time was always envisioned as being something that we would need And in fact, we're at that point right now. Everyone is embracing the new ordinance in terms of using it. However, when you do a deep dive for any project, you come upon problems that in many cases have prevented projects from using the new ordinance. And we simply need some more time. And in that regard, a lot of the problems that we encounter can be revised and addressed via the transitional provisions. We have worked hard with the Park and Planning Commission and the County Exec's Office and members of the County Council to address and revise the transitional provisions. We had a meeting most recently with the council, Mr. Warner, for the Planning Board. We think we are close to having an agreement, and we would like the opportunity to put that before you as well. Thank you very much for your time, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs. We have a Layla Riazi. Very good. Followed by Greg Smith and Kathy Bartolomeo.
Good afternoon. Layla Riazi, a very proud member of County Council Chair Jolene Ivey's district. What I will say is that I came here with a different set of remarks prepared, as did many. I came to laud you for being the People's Council, that you had stepped forward and we had brought you into office because we needed you to be the People's Council. I'm really disappointed after today because the people have been here to speak, and I really think that there was a better way to handle what happened this morning. Aside from that, I just want to speak on a few issues. So what's before us here today, everybody's been working on for a very long time, and we all know that. But what's before us here today, we need to look at how do we look at the zoning rewrite. And the zoning rewrite was for clarity, and it was also to give more voice to the people. And I really want for you to hear that, because what's being proposed with CGO, the alternative that's being proposed removes people's voices. And it actually works against what's been exhibited in the 2035 plan and what the climate action plan, the climate implementation action plan, all of those things. And we can do better. We're not saying no. We're saying have the opportunity that this is not by right, that this is by coming once again for people to have a voice. I understand that there's still need to work on different things with the zoning rewrite, but to go for another 2 years, and I recognize the time, isn't going to get us there. It's too much time. I really support what was brought forward, the idea of a 6-month extension. I know you've already made a vote, but there's another way to go ahead with an amendment. Let's look at the things that move this process forward and give the public a voice in the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Riazi. Mr. Smith, Kathy Bartolomeo, and I think our last speaker is Dan Smith.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Smith. I live at 4204 Farragut Street in Hyattsville. Wow. I've rarely seen local residents and community association representatives treated with more disrespect than today. You brought forth amendments that have been posted only yesterday with no public notice, unless the public knows to look at that particular page on your website to see whether amendments have been filed. One of the amendments amounts to basically a massive zoning text amendment that can affect hundreds of properties outside of the Beltway. No attempt to identify for the public, including the potentially affected communities, identify those properties. No attempt to assess and disclose the potential impacts of what could happen if development of the scale that could happen by right if this amendment goes through. It could be between 500 if it's a 25-acre site, 20 to 48 units per acre. It could be 500 to 1,200 units on that particular property. No assessment of potential traffic impact on local roads, air pollution impacts, stormwater impacts, impacts on schools, fire, rescue, any of that. But you come forward and you put up an amendment at the last minute with not even allow, you invite us to show up to provide you with written comments, which we take time out from work or family to do. We take time to show up here, and then you move the amendments without even hearing our comments. And, I like and I respect the members of this council, including some of the folks who took these actions. But I'm just appalled that this is the way it's been done. Let me just finish here. We met with Councilmember Glaros on October 3rd of 2018 and asked her some basic questions about the rewrite that she wanted to push through weeks later. She couldn't even answer fundamental basic questions. Mr. Berlage was in the room, as was Amy Olivo. So they want more time. They've had 5.5 years since that bill was pushed through over our objections. They've had 2 years since it took effect. And they could have figured this out. They get paid hundreds of dollars an hour just to participate in proceedings like this. We get paid nothing. We lose livelihood to be here. Thank you.
Next, we got, I'm sorry, you are?
I'm Kathy Bartolomeo.
Oh, I apologize. Mr. Olson has alerted me that he has some constituents who did not sign up who want to speak. So after, if you could get them the sign-up sheet, and then after Mr. Smith, you guys can go next. Sorry, Kathy.
Okay. I'm from Greenbelt, Maryland. I'm a member of a number of groups, one of them being the Climate Justice Wing for the state of Maryland. In Greenbelt, I live. I'm very fortunate to live there, covered by lots of trees and access to many, many things where I can bike, walk, or a little driving to the grocery store, church, community centers, playgrounds abound, doctors, and bus connections. Why haven't we done this with the rest of the PG County people over these years? I drive through the county's areas and see big townhomes, big homes, but I struggle to see any trees that provide any heat protection. Few playgrounds, very few, and community centers that are close by or to walking distance. And just a side point, gas stations have gone up, and so many of them are without any EV chargers. All development must have input from the communities to make sure we put in place what the community needs, such as the items mentioned above. We can't have the developers decide what will go in. I urge the council also to look at a recording that I sent out to you earlier today, Friday's Maryland League of Conservation Voters session on data centers. The huge impact needs to be addressed, their use of energy, water, noise, space, and how they address the diesel generators. There's 180 diesel generators that go with one data center, creating huge amounts of greenhouse gas. Are we going to offset these greenhouse gas by renewable energy, and what types of data centers are going to be allowed, and are they going to be defined as a critical infrastructure, and is that going to be defined? I urge you also to look at Sugarloaf Alliance, which has tried to work with this issue. I'm thinking about the climate issue every day. I do a lot of research, attending meetings and informing others. I have now 3 grandchildren. And I'm very concerned, as I'm sure everybody here is, about our family's future. We can't worry about the next election or how our next position will be. We must focus on smart development aligned with mass transit, fewer vehicles miles traveled, and community needs. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, and then the folks who are, Mr. Smith? Yeah. Can we get a sign-up sheet for that?
Thank you. Dan Smith from Chevrolet. With the evidence that's piling up daily for increased impacts from sprawl development that increases our vulnerability to climate change, creates a sustainable strain to schools, transportation, air quality, to our forests and streams, and to our budget, This is not the time to weaken the ordinance. In fact, we should be looking to strengthen our zoning ordinance and development policies. Strengthen them to hasten transition from a dependence on fossil fuels, car-driven development, hasten the transition to the new green economy. That is the transition that this body should be focusing on today and in the immediate future. Instead, we continue to be digging ourselves into a deeper hole, leaving worse problems to future generations and taxpayers. That is wrong. These bad amendments are part of the hanging on to old ways of development. That will cause real damage if they continue. Is anyone here to support any of these three weakening amendments who is not from the development community? Anyone? The proponents of those amendments would have a little bit more credibility if you would bring some supporters who are not from the development community. I challenge you to bring at least 5 members of your constituents who support these measures when this comes forward to the full vote at the county council. Yes. And Chair Ivey, your comment about the pandemic being the cause for additional 2-year delay literally turned my stomach. It did. Because during the delay, what continued? The development review. The Amazon warehouse that blindsided us in Cheverly that resulted in 4 acres of floodplain trees being cut. We asked for a delay at the planning board hearing. That was one agency of government that continued unabated. And we have the attorneys from the other side here that can verify that. That is no excuse for continuing this. All I can say, we can't turn the clock back. Stop developing like it's 1960. Join the green new economy now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Sir, Mr. Bracy? Bracy? And then, ma'am, you can be next.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Earl Bracy. I'm with the Lincoln Civic Association. I don't think my neighborhood looks like your community. And when I say that, I'm looking at, we say we're going to do the CGO and we're going to build residential property, but we're also going to include restaurants and so forth and so on. But when we give them the opportunity to build, they'll build, but the rest of it is not even included. So I don't understand how this is supposed to make us move forward. And then our taxes are still going up, but we don't have any of the amenities. So explain this to me. Help me understand how we improve on this type of situation when we're moving forward. I see we have a lot of lawyers here who are representing those builders and so forth and so on, but who's representing the communities? Who's representing us? And I think it's supposed to be you guys.
Okay. Is that Ms. Bracy coming up? And Jamie Farrar, you're next. I saw Assistant Planning Director, and I thought Park and Planning. I didn't read the rest that said Greenbelt, so I apologize for Ms. Farrar. So Ms. Mary Bracy, and then Jamie, or he. Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, Council and everyone here. I wasn't going to say anything, but what we experienced this morning from our council members was totally unacceptable. I was just so embarrassed. I hope that the news media was not here, or maybe we should have let them be here, because what we saw this morning was totally unacceptable for adults. We are from Lincoln Vista Civic Association, but I'm not just a member of the Civic Association. I pay taxes here. My children went to school here. I have lived here for over 30 years. I just don't know what to say at this point about the behavior that we saw this morning. I just really hope that that never happens again. And I know that we have a lot of, as my husband said, a lot of attorneys here, but we are the citizens here, and you all represent us. Please represent us as adults. Thank you.
Jamie Farrar. Maureen Fine will be the last speaker.
Good afternoon. Jamie Fear, Assistant Director of Planning for the City of Greenbelt. Unfortunately, our City Council has not yet had an opportunity to review the bill, but we did submit a letter, I believe, late yesterday that hopefully you have reviewed, and it outlines our request to allow more discussion regarding the implications of the prohibition on multifamily and townhomes in the CGO outside of the Beltway, and how that may affect the city of Greenbelt as we lie both inside and outside of the Beltway. And at this time, I don't think I have any further comment other than to point you to that letter, and we believe that the amendment that was carried earlier helps to continue that conversation. Thank you.
Ms. Fine.
Hello, I'm Maureen Fine, and I'm here to submit testimony on behalf of Mr. Gary Allen, a former council member and mayor of the city of Bowie, and also a commissioner on the Climate Action Plan Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony today. A longer version has been submitted for the record. I am impressed with the thoughtfulness of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning draft ordinance, and strongly oppose extending the time to use the old ordinance for approval of new land uses. The development community has had nearly 5 years to transition from the old ordinance. They've also been part of planning for the 2035 master plan. The old ordinance should be completely phased out as rapidly as possible. I support the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning transitional rules and grandfathering provisions. I applaud that the CGO zone is changed to preclude townhouses and multifamily dwellings by right, as is allowed under the old ordinance. The council must be given full discretion for any changes in new uses in the future. Appeals to preserve, protect, and grandfather the old ordinance, old objectives, and old ideas under any framework of the new rules must be rejected. We look to you to protect the new guardrails for future growth of this county. There is another area that I am concerned about: the conformity of the new zoning rules to allow for consideration of the adopted provisions for the Climate Action Plan. All zoning and development proposals must be accompanied by an assessment of the greenhouse gas impacts of the building being permitted. We appeal to the council to make sure that its land use planning objectives and climate are aligned. Climate impact must be equal to other adequate public facility impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's our final speaker. I hope at this point, because it's 10 after 1, we can move on